The coffee at Maple and Birch had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but Judith Harlow hadn't noticed. She was watching the door. Table 4, the one by the window with the view of Elgin Street, was where she always sat for these things. Close enough to the exit that she could leave without making a scene. Far enough from the bar that no one would assume she was waiting to be picked up. She'd chosen this cafe specifically. Not too expensive, not too shabby. The kind of place where a woman in a second-hand blazer wouldn't look out of place. That was the whole point. Judith Harlow was 41 years old, and on paper, she was the kind of woman who could have anything she wanted. She ran Harlow Meridian Group, a mid-sized logistics and infrastructure consulting firm that operated across 6 provinces and billed somewhere north of $40 million a year. She owned a townhouse in Westboro that she'd bought outright. She had a personal driver she almost never used because she preferred to walk. She had a standing reservation at a restaurant on Preston that she'd visited exactly twice. What she did not have, what she had almost convinced herself she no longer needed, was someone she could trust. 23 blind dates in 4 years. She kept a count, not out of vanity, but because she was a person who tracked data. 23 men, most of whom were perfectly pleasant, 3 of whom were genuinely charming, and every single one of whom had, at some point in the evening, let something slip. A question about her condo, a comment about her company, an offhand remark, delivered with a studied casualness that was almost impressive, about what a CEO must pull in these days, or whether she'd considered investing in some particular thing, or whether she might be interested in meeting a friend who happened to be raising capital. She had developed a test. She was not proud of it. She understood, on an intellectual level, that it was imperfect and possibly unkind. But she had also watched her closest friend marry a man who spent 3 years draining a joint account before disappearing to Kelowna with a Pilates instructor. And she had watched her CFO's sister lose a house she'd inherited to a partner who'd borrowed against it without telling her. And Judith had decided that the discomfort of a small deception was worth the information it produced. The test was simple. She dressed down for the date. No labels, nothing that signaled money. She made the reservation under a fake name. She told them she worked in logistics, which was true, and that she was in project management, which was also true in the broadest possible sense. And when the bill arrived, she reached into her bag and said, quietly and without drama, "I'm so sorry, I think I left my card at the office. Is there any way? I'll pay you back, obviously." 23 men. 3 reactions. Anger, awkward calculation, or a kind of eager generosity that curdled, by the end of the night, into something that wanted a return on its investment. She had not gone on a second date with any of them. The door opened, and a man walked in wearing a jacket that had been washed so many times it had gone from whatever original color it started, as to a kind of soft, indeterminate gray. He was somewhere in his mid-50s. She'd been told 53. With close-cut silver hair and the kind of hands that looked like they'd done actual work at some point, not the soft-palmed hands of someone who'd spent 30 years in boardrooms. He was not what she'd pictured from the brief profile her friend Carol had sent over. "You'll like him. He's quiet. He doesn't talk about himself much. Just trust me." He looked around the cafe with no particular urgency, found her, and walked over without checking his reflection in the window the way most men did. "Judith," he said. "That's me, Raymond Breyer." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without the usual performance. No comment about how much better she looked than her photo. No self-deprecating joke about being late when he was, in fact, exactly on time. He just sat, picked up the menu, and said, "Do you know what you want, or are you still deciding?" She had been on enough of these dates to understand that the first 10 minutes told you almost nothing, and the second 10 minutes told you almost everything. The first 10 were just 2 people managing anxiety. It was around minute 12 or 13 that people started to relax into who they actually were. Raymond Breyer started relaxing at minute 9. He ordered a dark roast, nothing else. When she asked him what he did, he said he was in equipment management, which she later understood to mean that he owned a company that refurbished and leased industrial equipment to construction and resource firms across northern Ontario and Quebec. He said this the way someone might say they worked at a hardware store. No elaboration, no performance. When she pressed him, gently, asking how long he'd been doing it, he said, "About 22 years. It's not glamorous, but it keeps me busy." She asked him about his life. He told her, without hesitation, that he had a daughter. Her name was Pippa. She was 12. She lived with him full-time. Her mother, his ex-wife, had left. Pippa was 7, had moved to Vancouver, and was present in their lives in the way that a person who sends birthday cards but never calls is present. Raymond said all of this without bitterness and without the particular kind of sad performance that some men use to generate sympathy. He said it the way someone states a fact about weather. "That must be hard," Judith said. "Doing it alone." "It's hard," Raymond said. "But she's a good kid. Better than I deserve, honestly." He smiled when he said it. Not a performance of a smile, a real one, the kind that starts somewhere behind the eyes and takes a second to reach the mouth. Judith thought, "Oh, that's the first one of those I've seen in a long time." They talked for an hour. He asked her questions and listened to the answers. He didn't interrupt. When she said something she thought was mildly funny, he laughed genuinely, and when she said something that wasn't, he didn't pretend. He mentioned at one point that he'd driven up from Stittsville, a 40-minute drive, because the parking was easier. She filed that away. A 40-minute drive for a first date. That was either desperation or genuine interest, and nothing else about him suggested desperation. When the bill arrived, Judith reached into her bag. She had rehearsed this moment 23 times. She knew what she was about to do, and she knew what the data said would happen next. She pulled out her wallet, opened it, looked inside with the expression of a person who has just found something unexpected and said, "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I think I left my other card at the office. I have some cash, but not. Would it be all right if I got you next time?" Raymond Breyer looked at her, not at the wallet, at her. "Of course," he said. He took out his own wallet, worn leather, the kind that gets soft with age, and put a card down on the table without looking at the amount. "Don't worry about it. No calculation, no pointed pause. No, well, I suppose so. Just, don't worry about it." And then, and this was the part Judith had not expected, the part that caught her completely off guard, his phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it and said, "Sorry, that's probably Pippa. I told her I'd check in." He picked it up, read the screen, and his face did something that Judith had not seen a face do in a very long time. It went soft, completely, unguardedly soft. He typed something quickly, smiled again, and put the phone face down. "Everything okay?" she asked. "She made pasta for the first time, sent me a picture." He paused. "It looked terrible. I told her it looked great." Judith Harlow sat across from this man in his washed-out gray jacket and his worn leather wallet and thought very quietly in the part of herself she rarely let speak. He passed. She drove home along the Queensway with the radio off. The test had worked. It had always worked. It had just never produced this particular result before, this feeling of having found the thing you'd set a trap for, and then not knowing what to do next. She called Carol. "Well," Carol said. He paid without hesitating. "I told you. He has a daughter. She made pasta tonight. I know, he talks about her constantly. It's almost annoying." A pause. "Almost." Judith looked out at the lights along the highway. "I think I want to see him again, obviously," Carol said. "That's why I set it up." The second date was at a Vietnamese place on Somerset that Judith had chosen because it was small and unpretentious and the pho was legitimately good. She came as herself this time, her actual blazer, her actual watch, her actual shoes, and told herself it didn't matter. It was just dinner. There was no reason to feel anxious about a meal with someone she'd already met once. She felt anxious anyway. Raymond arrived wearing a different jacket, this one a navy wool that fit him properly. He'd made an effort, she realized, a small effort, calibrated to the occasion. She found this more reassuring than a suit would have been. They ordered. He asked her, without preamble, how her week had been. She started to give the answer she always gave. Busy, the usual, nothing interesting, and then something made her stop. She thought about what Raymond had said on the first date, how he'd talked about Pippa without any protection, without any of the armor that people wore around the things they actually cared about. And she said instead, "Honestly, long. I've been navigating a contract dispute that's been going on for 3 months and I'm tired of it." Raymond nodded. "What kind of contract?" "A subcontractor in Sudbury who's claiming force majeure on a delivery they simply didn't plan for properly. Equipment, industrial components. It's boring." "It's not boring," Raymond said. "It sounds frustrating." "It is," she admitted. "What does force majeure cover in your contracts?" She looked at him. "You know about contract law?" "Some." I had a situation a few years back with a supplier in Thunder Bay, spent about 6 months reading case law in the evenings. He picked up his chopsticks. The courts tend to look pretty narrowly at what qualifies. If the event was foreseeable, it doesn't usually hold. She stared at him for a moment. That's exactly the argument we're making. Then you'll probably win. There was a silence that was comfortable in the way that silences between people are comfortable when both of them have stopped performing. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? She considered this. Someone who talked more about himself. Raymond smiled. There's not that much to say. She didn't believe that, and she was beginning to understand that the not believing it was the interesting part. Toward the end of the meal, she said, carefully, because she was a careful person, I should tell you something. Raymond put down his chopsticks. Last time, she said, with the card, I didn't actually forget it. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that has weight. I know, Raymond Breyer said. She went still. You, what? I figured it out about 30 seconds in. He was quiet for a moment. You checked your wallet before you looked up. People who actually forget their card look up first and then check. And you were watching my face. Judith felt something she had not expected to feel, which was embarrassment. Not the performed embarrassment of the test. Real embarrassment. Why didn't you say anything? Because it seemed like it mattered to you. He picked up his water glass. And because I understand why someone in your position would need to know. My position, she said. You're the CEO of Harlow Meridian, Raymond said. Carol mentioned it after I agreed to the date. She thought I should know. He paused. I didn't bring it up because it's not what I was interested in. Judith Harlow sat across from this man who had seen through her test, said nothing, paid the bill anyway, and was now telling her, with absolutely no drama, that her money was not the point, and she felt something she hadn't felt since she was in her 20s, since before she had anything worth protecting. She felt seen. I'm sorry, she said. It was a dishonest thing to do. A little, Raymond said, but I've done worse for better reasons. He set down his glass. Can I ask you something? Yes, the other 20-some dates? Did any of them pass? She shook her head. He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when information confirms what they already believed. That must have been lonely, he said. Not as a criticism, as a fact, the same way he talked about everything. She didn't answer immediately, because the answer was yes, and she was 41 years old, and had spent 4 years building a very elegant case for why loneliness was preferable to the alternative, and hearing someone name it out loud with that particular gentleness was almost more than she knew how to take. It was, she said finally. Yes, the third date, Raymond brought Pippa. Judith had not expected this. He'd texted the night before, Pippa's with me this weekend. Would it be strange if she came? We can do something else if that's easier. And Judith, who was not impulsive, who planned everything, who had a calendar that her assistant called aggressively structured, had typed back, no, bring her, and then immediately wondered what she was doing. They met at the Rideau Center food court, which Pippa had apparently chosen on the grounds that it had a Colonel's popcorn, and also that formal restaurants made her feel like she had to sit like a statue. Pippa Breyer was 12 years old, angular and watchful, with her father's eyes and a seriousness about her that sat alongside a sudden quick wit, the way a gray sky sits alongside sunbreak. She shook Judith's hand when they met, which Judith had not expected from a 12-year-old. Then she looked at Judith very directly and said, My dad said you work in logistics. I looked it up. You're actually the CEO of a consulting company. Judith looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at the ceiling. That's right, Judith said. He didn't know the difference, Pippa said. I had to explain it to him. She's not wrong, Raymond said. So why did you say logistics? Pippa asked. There was no accusation in it, just curiosity. The genuine, unedited curiosity of someone who hadn't yet learned to soften questions for the comfort of the person being asked. Judith thought about a careful answer. Then she thought about what Raymond had said on the second date. I understand why someone in your position would need to know. Because, she said, I've learned that when people know I run a company, they sometimes start treating me like the company and not like me. Pippa considered this with genuine seriousness. That makes sense, she said finally. People at school do that to me too. They find out my dad's company does the thing with the Muskoka builds and then they want to come over and use the dock. The Muskoka dock? Judith asked. Raymond cleared his throat. We have a property up north. It's modest. It has a sauna, Pippa said. Pippa. It does, though. Judith looked between them and felt something loosen in her chest, the specific kind of loosening that happens when you have been holding something very tightly for a very long time, and something makes you forget, briefly, to keep holding it. They ate food court food. Pippa got 2 flavors of kernels and shared them, without being asked. She told Judith, at length, about a project she was doing on the Great Lakes watershed for her geography class, and Judith, who had actually done environmental assessments adjacent to the Great Lakes Basin for a client in 2019, found herself genuinely engaged in a conversation with a 12-year-old about phosphorus runoff. Raymond sat between them, eating a slice of pizza and saying very little, and at one point Judith caught him just watching the 2 of them with an expression that was so unguarded and so quiet that she looked away quickly, feeling like she'd seen something she hadn't been meant to. At the end of the afternoon, Pippa said, "Are you going to come again?" Judith glanced at Raymond. "That's up to Judith," Raymond said. Pippa looked at Judith. "I'd like to," Judith said. Pippa nodded as though this settled something. "Good. Dad needs people who'll tell him when he's being boring." "I'm not boring," Raymond said. "You have the same 3 topics," Pippa said. "Equipment, the weather, and whatever book you're reading. You've been reading the same book since February. It's a long book. It's 400 pages. I read slowly. Judith laughed, a real laugh, not the managed kind she usually produced on dates, and the sound of it surprised her a little, the way a voice surprises you when you haven't used it for a while. The problem started, as problems often do, with someone else's mouth. Judith had told no one about Raymond except Carol. She kept it close because she kept everything close, and because this particular thing felt fragile in a way she couldn't fully articulate. But 3 weeks after the food court afternoon, one of her junior partners, a woman named Frances who had the specific social intelligence of someone who notices everything, and the specific social awareness of someone who mentions it anyway, stopped by her office after a board prep session and said, "Is it true you're seeing someone?" Carol mentioned it to Deborah. Judith felt the familiar closing down. "It's new," she said. "Who is he? What does he do?" "Equipment management." Frances had the good sense to make her face stay neutral, but Judith had spent 20 years reading faces in negotiations, and she saw the flicker. Equipment management, the unspoken math of it, the slight recalibration. "That's nice," Frances said in a tone that meant something slightly different than the words. Judith said nothing. But that evening, she sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea that went cold the same way the coffee had at Maple and Birch, and she thought about that flicker. And then, because she was honest with herself even when it was uncomfortable, she thought about why it bothered her. Not because Frances had done anything wrong, exactly, but because it held up a mirror she hadn't wanted to look into. She had built a test to protect herself from people who wanted her money. She had congratulated herself on its elegance. She had never once considered what the test said about her. That underneath the CEO, underneath the $40 million revenue in the Westboro townhouse, and the standing reservation she barely used, she was someone who had decided trust was something other people got to have. She called Raymond. "Can I come over?" she said. A pause. "Now? If that's all right? Pippa's here. We're watching something. I don't mind." Another pause, shorter this time. "Okay." She drove out to Stittsville in the November dark, along the 417, past the suburban sprawl softened by the first serious frost of the season. Raymond's house was not what she'd imagined. She'd imagined something Spartan, functional, a place that said a man lives here alone with a kid, and no one's had time for anything else. Instead, it was a narrow 2-story with good bones and terrible shutters, a front with salt damage that no one had got around to fixing. And every window was lit from inside, and through the front window she could see the blue flicker of a television. Raymond opened the door before she knocked. "You saw me pull up," she said. "The motion light." Pippa appeared at his shoulder. She was wearing a large wool sweater and had a blanket around her shoulders. She looked at Judith and said, "Did something happen?" "I just wanted to talk to your dad," Judith said. Pippa looked between them with the unreadable assessment of someone who has, from a young age, been paying attention to adults. Then she said, "I'll go finish the episode," and disappeared back into the living room. Raymond led her into the kitchen, which smelled like something baked earlier. She could see a pan on the stove with a dish towel over it. He poured her tea without asking if she wanted any. "What's going on?" he said. And Judith Harlow, who had spent 20 years making sure that when she spoke in a room, it was exactly the right thing at exactly the right time, said, "I've been thinking about the test." He waited. "I've been thinking about it, and I think I owe you a more complete apology than the one I gave. Because it wasn't just that it was dishonest. It was that it assumed something about you, before you'd done anything to deserve being assumed about." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "I'm not angry about it," he said. "I know. That almost makes it worse, because you're used to people reacting?" "Because I'm used to being right," she said. "About who people are underneath the first impression. I'm good at it. I've built a career on being good at it." She looked at her tea. "And I think somewhere along the way I decided I was so good at it that I didn't have to actually let anyone near enough to find out." The kitchen was very quiet. From the other room, very faintly, she could hear the television. "My ex-wife," Raymond said, after a moment, "left without a conversation. She just was there and then wasn't, and I spent a long time afterward trying to figure out what sign I'd missed, what I should have seen. And eventually Pippa said to me," she was 9, she said, "Dad, you can't see a thing if you're looking for it in the wrong direction." He looked at his mug. 9 years old. Judith thought about Pippa at the food court, shaking her hand, asking about logistics. "She's remarkable," she said. "She's kept me honest," Raymond said. "About a lot of things." A silence settled, but the good kind, the kind from the Vietnamese restaurant, the kind with weight that wasn't heavy. "I don't want to test you anymore," Judith said. Raymond looked at her. "All right, I just wanted to say that out loud to someone. I'm glad you said it to me." From the living room, Pippa called, "Dad," the episode ended. "There's another one. Do you want to watch, or is this going to be a long talking thing?" Raymond raised his eyebrows at Judith. "How long is the episode?" she called back. A pause. 42 minutes. Judith looked at Raymond. He looked at her. "We'll be in," she called. She heard Pippa settle back into the couch. Raymond picked up his mug, then picked up hers, and led her out of the kitchen and into the warm, televised light of the living room, where a blanket-wrapped 12-year-old wordlessly made room on the couch without being asked. Judith sat down. The episode started. She did not think about the test, or the contract dispute, or the $40 million revenue, or Francis's flicker of a face, or the 23 men before this one. She thought about phosphorus runoff and badly made pasta, and a worn leather wallet and a man who read slowly and had 3 topics and had looked at her, once across a food court table, like she was a person worth arriving 40 minutes early for. Outside, the frost had settled over Stittsville, quiet and complete, the way that peace settles when you've finally stopped arguing with it.